Practice. Yeah, I really wanted to talk today, kind of big picture wise, about this talk I like to think of about like how do we get here, what are we doing, and where are we going? Always good questions. And Gordon reminded me someone should break out into the David Byrne song. So if anybody needs to do that, that'd be good. But, I was thinking about how we have lots of maps that get provided to us that try to tell us, like, where are we, how did we get here, what are we doing, where are we going? And, lots of maps. Cultural maps, you got some maps from your family. Capitalism tries to give us some maps. Lots of people with lots of ideas about maps. And I don't know about you, I have traditionally been very dissatisfied with most of those in my life and not found them to be great guides. But it's interesting, I kept looking for maps, and then when I kind of ran across practice maps, I thought, oh, well, this is an interesting concept. I wonder if these are trustworthy. All these other maps have not seemed to be very trustworthy. And so here we are, almost 20 years later in a practice period, and I think I can say, like, with confidence, I feel like these maps of practice are trustworthy, but you'll have to check that out for yourself. But I did want to talk about kind of practice maps broadly, kind of like how'd we get here, and I don't mean like how'd you get here in your life, but like how'd you get into practice? Like, why are you here on the cushion right here this morning? So kind of making sense out of like various pathways into practice that people experience, because I think it can be helpful to look at those kind of broadly. Like, we think about mindfulness as a health promotion behavior, but it's also mindfulness as a Dharma practice. So what are those? And then in terms of like, what are we doing here? And I don't mean existentially in your life. You talk to your therapist about that. But like, what are we doing here at Wild Heart? So various types of meditation practices that might be called mindfulness. Kind of open versus focused awareness practices. Sometimes we call them shamatha or vipassana practices. So broadly, kind of what are those and why are we doing those? And then where are we going? What are we doing? This is a path. Where's this path taking us? And it kind of depends on why you're here, obviously. But I like to think about this in the context of like liberation from and then waking up to. So kind of we'll talk through those categories. So, but yeah, starting out with why are we here? You might ask yourself that question right now. On the cushion, why'd you come to Wild Heart this morning? It's a curious thing. Or if you sit at home, like, why do you do that? And I think a lot of people come into a meditation practice, or at least in our community anyways, through this channel or this path of like what we would call mindfulness as a health promotion behavior, which sounds all technically, but that is what it's called kind of in scientific literature. And so basically what that means is like a lot of us will come into a meditation practice, self included, we're learning mindfulness skills as a distinct set of skills to address a physical or a mental health kind of issue or concern. So if you came here as part of a recovery practice, or because your therapist sent you, or you're like trying to use mindfulness to help with anxiety or trauma or depression or whatever, it's like that. So it's very content focused. We're using mindfulness skills to help with some personal content that is distressing. And so these are all these big like branded evidence-based mindfulness-based practices. So mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, mindfulness-based relapse prevention. And those are all considered like in the scientific realm, like evidence-based practices. Mindfulness works for that. It's pretty freaking amazing. And that's why I started practicing. Just personally, I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard this story, but I had two friends who completed suicide in about a 6-month period, and it was really devastating. Like, I had not really ever experienced a bereavement like grief like that, and kind of all my other good skills I had were like not touching that grief at all. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, grief is always feels like the tide, it's like high tide where you like can't breathe and feel like you're going to die. Basically, you don't know what's up or down. And then low tide where it's just like nothing, empty nothingness. It's really hard to go between those two extremes. And so I'm a person in recovery, and, I knew that I needed to be able to do something with these big emotions. My skills weren't working. I was reading a book about meditation. I think I kept talking about it to my therapist every week. And at one point she was like, Rachel, are you going to just keep talking about this? You're going to actually go do it? And I was like, challenge accepted. Here we go 18 years later. But it really was like, I was just trying to learn how to like function in my life. Like I would be like in a grocery store sobbing for no reason. And I was like, this does not work. Something's got to change here. And, it is really, and so your entry path might be something different, but, it really was about like, I'm just trying to suffer a little less here, or like do this in a more skillful way. Cause this is like, I can't live like this. And so intuitively knowing that like, there's got to be something else, a better way possible, but not being real clear about that but and it's so funny, the place I learned to meditate, there was not a lot of teaching instruction, it was just meditation instruction, and we did all open awareness practice for like the first 3 years of my practice, or chanting in Tibetan, which I didn't understand at all. I didn't know what the hell it was about, but I knew that when I went and did these like open awareness practices, or this weird ass chanting, like I felt better. Like the ability to just get calm and quiet and sit and stay. Like not complicated in theory, very difficult in practice. I just felt a lot better, learning to just rest and get quiet and really be okay with whatever it was. And it was hard because that first big whatever it was really unpleasant and really big and really bad feeling. But just learning to sit and get steady, which is kind of a taste of equanimity, this kind of steadiness amidst, whatever it is. Just really, really relieving very quickly. And so there's a kind of a famous Viktor Frankl quote that says, between stimulus and response, there's choice. And I think about like, that's what we're doing in kind of that kind of meditation. And so that's how I kind of started sitting. Mindfulness is a health promotion behavior. We're learning a set of very specific skills to apply to a very specific set of personal content. And it's very helpful very quickly. And then there's, mindfulness is Dharma practice, which is a little different. And I struggled to figure out how to define this in 3 sentences. So my God, if y'all have better ideas, please, let's talk about them. But I think about this often as like, we're like expanding the scope of what we're doing with our meditation. So we're kind of moving out of whatever that personal bit of difficulty is into a kind of a broader, more expansive view. So moving out of this personal content, because what the Dharma offers is actually something quite radical, but it's that we're getting real familiar with the underlying processes that are fueling all these personal kind of content issues, and kind of getting at like the root causes of what's going on. Instead of just kind of cutting off the branches of what's hard. And so that, Dharma practice is, ask 5 different people what that is or what Buddhism is, and you're going to get 5 different answers, because it's, Buddhism's not one thing. It's a living spiritual tradition that's been around for 2,600 years. So we got a lot of wide variety of practices and forms that takes. But, basically what we're looking at is these underlying root causes of difficulty and freedom, essentially. And I think, no matter how you landed here at Wild Heart, because we have space for both of those kind of motivations for practice. And I would suspect most of us are kind of in between those, one foot in both. Most of us got here in the same way that Buddha did, honestly. He's a human who lived 2,600 years ago, and things were really hard. The typical ways the culture offers and offered him then to work with that difficulty were not working. And there's just this intuitive knowing that like something else, there's got to be more freedom possible than what I'm being able to access now. And so, something was hard and there's a desire to be free. It's kind of simple, actually. But it is the interesting thing, right? So like, what are we doing in meditation? And you should ask yourself that question right now too. Like, what am I doing when I meditate, actually? And we're real big picture today. This is the view from 30,000 square feet up here today. But it's mind training. Meditation is mind training. We're training the mind and the heart to acclimate. This is how I think about it, to acclimate towards openness and connection so that we can be free. Free from what? Isn't that a fun question? Everybody knows what suffering feels like because it hurts, and that's how you got here. But freedom, that's what we're acclimating towards. But we don't do spiritual bypassing, so that's kind of the good news, bad news about this whole thing. It's like in recovery, they say like the good news about recovery is you get your feelings back, and then the bad news is you get your feelings back. And I feel like meditation's the same way. It's like the good news is you can be completely free. You can do this yourself. You have to do this yourself. Nobody else can do this for you. It's like, oh shit, okay. But kind of broadly what we do in terms of practice, like what are we doing in practice, we could kind of group our practices into I'm like a bullet pointed list person. And so when I think about these kind of high level categories, we do what would be like calm abiding or tranquility meditation. Sometimes it's called samatha or shamatha practice. And, this is what we're doing in here when we're talking about resting the mind. And these are both like, if you're doing this for your health or your mental health or for the dharmic applications, both of us, we would do that. But we're kind of developing some meditative awareness and stability, this like meditative observer capacity. And two ways of doing this tranquility or calm abiding practice. There are focused attention practices and there are open monitoring practices. So shamatha and vipassana are the two main things we're doing, calm abiding and insight practice. And then we have these focused attention or open awareness and open monitoring techniques that we can use to do that. And it's really interesting. I think if you go to most insight meditation centers in the country, you will learn a mindfulness of breathing or body practice, because that's what the Buddha taught in the Satipatthana Sutta. And so those are using an object, like the breath or the body or sensations, to rest the attention upon. And so we're learning to connect with awareness, but we use an object for support. And it's funny because the first 3 years I learned to practice, we didn't do breath meditation at all, but we did a lot of chanting and mantra chanting, which is the same thing. But we're using a manufactured object for that support as a naturally arising one like breath or hearing. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about the benefits of this focused attention practice, saying that it clogs up the talk space in the mind. And I was like, I like that. It clogs up the talk channel in the mind that most of us are just so welded to, thinking mind all the time, that we kind of need somewhere else and something else to put the attention upon. But there's two main skills here today that we practice with that. It's in Pali, Sanskrit, kind of language of the Buddha. It's called Vitakka and Vichara. And so with this object, choose any object. You've probably sat outside in a place that was beautiful and done this and not known what you were doing. But the mechanics of this is what the Buddha did. He looked deeply into his own mind. It got really familiar with the mechanics of this, so we could do it too. Vitakka is this initial application of the mind to its object. So when we ring the bell, and I'm like, put your attention on the bell, there's a contact there, right? Attention and sound and hearing. And, it's also what leads the mind back to its object. But then there's vichara, which is the sustaining the contact. There's the contact and the sustaining. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing when we're training the mind. So we're coming into contact and we're anchoring. So that's what we're doing with focused attention. And then we're returning kindly when the mind wanders. Because again, that whole like untrained mind is like a flag flapping around in the wind. That doesn't feel good. Everybody in here has had the experience of being so welded to the contents of your thinking mind that you get confused and you think that you are your thoughts. That sucks. Like just in everybody knows what that feels, because when you're like welded to those thoughts, when they're doing this, that's what you feel like you're doing on the inside. But what we're doing with focused attention and all meditative processes, I would say, is getting cognitively unfused from the contents of the thinking mind. It's kind of a radical like exploration to say like, oh, maybe I'm not my thoughts. Maybe when my brain thinks crazy, wild shit, like it's just kind of like bubbles coming up in a glass of carbonated Sprite. Actually, maybe that's not me. Which begs the question, then what is? But we get unwelded from all that content by learning to move the mind somewhere else on purpose. And it's such a relief to do that. For me, when I was in my early stages of meditating, just that grief, man, when those tidal waves would happen and I felt fused to it, I felt like I couldn't breathe and I was dying. I know this sounds very dramatic, but it is very unpleasant. And then when there starts to be some space, those waves are still coming and going. It doesn't stop that, but we have some space from it. And so again, we're developing that kind of meditative observer mind, awareness and stability. But we can also do that with an open monitoring practice, which we don't teach as much here. I think it's more common maybe in the Tibetan tradition, for sure. Maybe in the Zen tradition, I don't actually know, so I'm to be totally wrong there. But it's, I think about open monitoring is all vitakka and no vichara. So it's all contact, but no sustaining. We're resting in the no. And so for some people, focused attention is very difficult. And I would say open awareness might even be harder, honestly, but maybe that's just because I don't know how my mind works. But you should try both. Open monitoring is not just thinking. It's not just, well, I'm just going to let whatever happens in my mind happens. We're resting in the attention that knows what's happening, but we're not sustaining contact with any of it. So whatever comes into focus is primary. Sound, we notice it, we let it be. Sensation in the left toe. Oh my God, I'm really hot right now. There's heat in the belly. There's like constriction around my ankle from my sock. And so we're just resting in that knowing, really kind of knowing that river and flow of sensations, but we're not sustaining a contact with any of it. And yeah, and I would say, like, what a glorious thing. Both of these practices, focused attention and open monitoring, kind of are leading in the same place, but different people have different kind of abilities and skill sets, so you can check into both of those. I think about open monitoring practices, those where like sitting in the river. Everybody sat in a stream before or something, and you know what that feels like. There's just this flow, and you can just sit there, And so anyways, Matthew Ricard has a great quote about this, kind of both of these kinds of practices. So calm abiding, stability, tranquility meditations. He says, we're learning to let thoughts arise and to be free we learn to let thoughts arise and be free to go as soon as they arise, instead of letting them invade the mind. In the freshness of the present moment, the past is gone, the future's not born. And if we can rest in pure mindfulness and this freedom, then potentially disturbing thoughts just arise and go and they don't leave a trace. And I think everybody's probably had some moments of that, brief or extended when you've been sitting. So that's initially what we're doing, is calm abiding. We're learning to rest the mind deeply. And if that's all you ever do, that is fantastic. You will get so much relief. And I would say folks who are kind of practicing mindfulness in this, as a health promotion kind of thing, that's really what we're doing primarily. But good news is that the Buddha and the Dharma offer something much more radical than just that. I always think about shamatha calm abiding practice as like, we've got, because the Buddha's teachings are about being free from mental and emotional suffering, right? Like that's what we're doing. We all have bodies. They're going to continue to hurt. Can't get rid of that. But the mental and emotional part, and I think about calm abiding and all this tranquility, kind of resting meditation, it like cuts the branches off of the tree of difficulty and suffering. Doesn't quite pull it up by the roots though. But if all we're doing is trimming branches, hey man, that's fantastic. Keep doing that. And the Dharma offers something much more radical, the promise of which is that you can actually pull this tree up by its roots in this very lifetime, perhaps. And we do that with what is called vipassana, or insight practice. So we use calm abiding as the platform that we then do this deep looking through. And so vipassana is a word. You hear it translated as insight meditation practice. And it's much more than stress reduction. We're really moving out of the personal content of whatever's difficult, and kind of expanding into this more process-focused thing. And it's not cognitive insight, like the word insight, we use it in everyday speech to mean like, oh, I had an understanding of the connection between this and this. It's not exactly that. It's certainly not just like relaxation. It's not a lot of intellectual activity, but the word vipassana actually means a special way of seeing that leads towards liberation and freedom. And so again, we're talking about freedom from, emotional and kind of mental distress. And so what we're doing in insight practice is developing it's almost like we're putting a new pair of glasses on, and we're learning to see in a way that leads to changes in our behavior that leads towards freedom. And Alan Wallace, who's a Lama American teacher that I like, says that it's the deep space of mind beyond the distortions of the clouds in the atmosphere. Which sounds like a fun thing. And then Sayadaw U Pandita, who's a teacher in the Thai tradition, says that what we're doing in Vipassana meditation is close attention to sensation, through which one ultimately sees the true nature of existence. Like, that sounds fun. I'm down for that. I don't know. But I think about this kind of in plain language is what we're learning to do is like reorganizing our perception, the way that we see the world. And we're reorienting to kind of openness and connectivity. And some really nice instructions for this. They're very basic. Tilopa is a beloved teacher in the Tibetan tradition. And he says, here are the instructions. Let go of what's past. Let go of what may come. Let go of what's happening right now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax right now and rest. I was like, that sounds really deceptively simple. Surely it couldn't be that easy. But this vipassana, this clear way of seeing that leads towards freedom, it's interesting because, again, we can do it through these two practices we talked about, this like focused attention or open monitoring practice. And this is kind of my way of making sense about what we're doing. But when we do these and you may have a different experience, I'd be curious to hear about that. But when I think about this object-focused practice, breath, sound, concentration, if you have a metta practice that's a phrase-driven, may we be at ease, may we be at peace, may we be free, it can be a concentration practice. But what we're getting, I think about this as like knowing what is known. We're getting really familiar with all of these objects and appearances, like emotions, thoughts, sensations, the breath. And we're really connecting with them. And then it's interesting, we're kind of getting to know how they're changing all the time, which seems so obvious. Duh. Everybody knows that cognitively. No, I can't say none of us know it very well experientially, but we're getting to know these appearances and objects through like the lens of the fact that they're always changing, flux and flow. It's part of life. It's not a problem to be solved. And this change process is very impersonal, actually. And it's very dissatisfying when we try to pin our happiness down on always changing thoughts, emotions, sensations, people, places, things, identities, senses of self. And so when we can start to really, and we start with easy things like the breath and sound, but then we turn that same way of looking into ourselves and our identities and ourselves. But as a result of that, we kind of quit trying to pin things down and hold on to them so much. Like, has anybody in here ever thought, like, maybe if I just hold on a little tighter, I'll be a little happier? Has it ever actually worked out in the history of human history? I don't think so. If it has, for the love of God, let us know. Or maybe not, because then we'll all keep doing it more. But Ajahn Chah, who's a beloved Thai teacher, would always say, let go a little bit of freedom. Let go a medium amount of freedom. Let go completely, complete freedom. Okay, so what that means is we gotta just and let it be. It's very hard because we're all very confused about that. And so this vipassana, or this insight practice, what we're gaining insight into is the deep changing nature of all things, and how we're always trying to pin things down and keep them and hold on to them. And that's like trying to, hold on to running water, kind of. It never works, but we all keep doing it. And then there's also this, we do this open monitoring practice, which I think is a nice platform into more of like knowing the knowing. So we want to start knowing this mind also. It's kind of an amazing thing. Like right from the outset, the Buddha's teachings are very clear in the Dhammapada that all things are made of mind. They come from mind, they're made of mind. And that's not some big belief, it's a statement on perception about, what our experience, our mind is like a mirror, it's reflecting experience, and we are all only experiencing mind right now. And, we just get very hung up in these appearances and grasped onto them and get tangled up in them. And so we have this other wing of practice where we can start to get to know the mirror-like quality of the mind. And I think open monitoring practices are a nice platform for that. And so this mirror, it's kind of a cool thing to think about your mind as being like a mirror. And neuroscience backs this up. When you see something, you're not seeing something out there. What you're seeing is an object in your brain. I mean, it's kind of a trippy thing. Again, I think most of us kind of know this, but just don't really think about it too much, We're not seeing anything out here. It's all in here. And how we experience our perceptions are very conditioned by our past. which is karma. But, kind of zooming out again, what are we doing with practice? Where are we going with all this insight practice, this open monitoring, this focused attention? We can think about it as being liberated from and then waking up to. And so you might think about, why do I practice? Why do I keep practicing? Probably those two things. There's a liberation from, there's some freedom from the mental and emotional suffering that got you on the cushion, I would hope. And if there's not, keep practicing. There will be. I'm glad you're here. But we get liberated from this suffering, this difficulty, this reactivity. We start to see more clearly how and why we suffer, how we create that for ourselves and for others. I was brainstorming what do I think we get liberated from with practice? And my list was a deep sense of unworthiness. That's nice. In the traditional languages, you'd hear we get liberated from what we call the defiling emotions, which is a real strong religious sounding word, but I kind of like it because it takes a strong stance, which are greed, hatred, confusion, pride, and jealousy. So we could have some freedom from those things because those cause intense emotional suffering, not just for ourselves, but others. We could have some liberation from always being pulled outside of ourselves and looking for happiness somewhere else in some other time. And this all comes from just sitting and getting quiet and learning to be kind of at ease and present with things as they are in the moment. And then we have this very tantalizing thing that we're maybe we're waking up to something. How does this freedom that comes with liberation then fruit? I was listening to this really great podcast the other day, and I thought they had a good, nice, plain language way of talking about it, so I wrote it down. But, essentially what we're waking up to is connectivity and interdependence. We call it emptiness in some traditions, but we're getting liberated from a sense of separate self and the confusion that is underneath that leads to that. Anyways, this person, Henry Schulman, who is the person being interviewed, said that what we're doing here is the experience of waking up to our original nature. We're waking up from an intuitive sense of being a separate self, and we start to wake up to see that this has actually been very misleading. Our mind has always been suggesting that there's been something fixed and stable and solid on board in here that's this real separate entity, and there's this entity and it's a distinction to everything else. And then to see and discover that, to see through what has beguiled us as a sense of self, to be liberated from that is actually a tremendous relief, because what it opens up is inseparability and connection. There's experience, there's this inseparable weave of experience, and there's really no separate me standing in the middle of it in distinction to it. So I thought that was a nice way of saying that. But we're waking up, this idea of not self in Buddhism can seem very philosophical and difficult. It's not, actually. There's a famous quote, I think, by a Stoic philosopher that I think illustrates actually what we're waking up to quite nicely, which says that no man stands in the same river twice. Neither the man nor the river is either the same. And we can remove the gendered language and still get the point, which is that, we always think there's a Rachael in here, like a man behind the curtains running the scene in The Wizard of Oz or something. But when we start to look a little more closely, where is that? I have not been able to find it. If you have, we should talk about it, because it's confusing. But you can start to look, and it's not that there's no self, it's not that there's a self, but it's that, who we are is always being influenced by the environment, and it's also always influencing the environment. It's interdependent. And it's this flux and flow of experience, and that's what we're tuning into and waking up towards. It's this openness, so that's what it feels like to me, is an openness. Sometimes you could call it this deep, kind of easeful, restful, natural wakefulness. I think that's what we're also waking up to. And I think it really is about relatedness, coming into connection with interdependence and interrelativity. And we're waking up, if we're moving away from this like intense kind of emotional and cognitive suffering, what we are waking up towards, dukkha is what we call that suffering, that dissatisfaction. So the Pali word sukha with an S is kind of what we're moving towards, which is this sense of ease that's really not tied up in external causes and conditions. It's just this kind of natural, peaceful, easeful, we call it non-referential happiness. And so wouldn't it kind of be nice if you could be okay, like deeply okay, like no matter the dumpster fire, that might be in here out there. And then we're out of this connectivity, this emptiness, we are waking up towards like really engaged and wise and compassionate action in our lives, because it's the natural outcome of knowing connectivity like that. So it's a very deeply engaged process. It's not a separating, it's not a disconnecting, it's a very engaged and thus often very, we're going to then go live our lives in a very different way out in the world.
What's up, y'all? Reverend Mikey Noshel here from Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for checking us out. Do me a favor, please like and subscribe. And if you feel moved to leave a donation, you can do so at wildheartmeditationcenter.org or the Venmo link in the description. Peace and love.